it's funny. And when you have this is the fun part about having kids. You don't have time to really construct,
Right.
uh, a narrative and policy, kind of a destiny for your kids. I mean, you kind of do, and the fun part is when you're dealing with a spouse, you find out that the first thing you begin life with in marriage is like we both agree that we want high values for the kids, and as you move along it's like, oh, you think that's a high value, oh, you think that's important. Those things adjust as you go along. It's like, oh
Sure.
shit, now I have to adjust everything. And almost to a point of I don't know where I even got that theory from. That premise. Was it your mother, my father, my other father, my mom? I just don't even know. All I know
Couldn't
is
even
this is
pick them
what we
out,
do.
but this is what has assimilated into you already. I
Yeah.
guess so. Then I guess
No, but we can
if
do it. We can do it. It's just it takes a little bit of thought. I
sure,
appreciate the question. So, did you want to do introductions?
sure. Let's. Why don't we just start with there?
Yep.
Why don't we start there? In the event that I don't know somebody who's not related to us is watching this video, which who knows, but I doubt.
I don't.
So
It's possible. So, because I'm a very popular guy.
it's
Um,
true.
so,
I tend to
not
keep to my cats.
really. Yeah, mine's
So
hiding in the corner. So, go ahead.
yeah. So I guess real quickly, I'm Ryan Sneishville, the favorite son of Raymond Sneishville, who also goes by Dad. So that's my role in this is just giving sons opinions and insight as to how I felt growing up and what I think I can use going forward, having learned from my experiences in general, but mostly, hopefully pulling from, I guess, what my father has either intended to teach me or kind of inherently taught me without him knowing.
Well, I'm Ray, and Ryan is one of my. He's actually out of five kids. He's my second favorite child. We won't say who the first is, but we actually call him number three. You can see the tattoo. He's child number three, total quintessential middle child. And this, I thought, Ryan, you told me this was. I thought this was going to be a session of therapy, telling me what I did wrong.
Oh, it could
And
still be that.
yeah, exactly. So I
It'll
think
always devolve into that.
I'm going to wonder, like, what did I do to deserve this? I thought this we were going to call us. What did I do to deserve this?
Yeah.
So we'll have to see how it goes. But nah, it was fun raising you guys, and we're still making this crap up as we go along. So as you are going to raise your kids soon, starting soon, you're going to make it up as you go along.
Yeah.
But as long as you're wired right. So, anyways, what do you want to talk about today, Rye?
Today we wanted to talk about, I think just basic values that we have developed over life. I think is what the topic has sort of boiled down into, and sort of. So we're going to talk about what will be our three biggest values that I think we've taken away over the over 30 plus combined years of parenting that we have between the two of us. And sort of what we hoped to pass on to the next generation, what we think may have passed on to the next generation, and just kind of, I don't know, introspect a little bit.
So, well, that's interesting. I mean, I think everything is you're made up from what your past created for you, whether you liked it or not. And so, Ryan, you've had the pleasure of having a grandfather for many years.
Yep.
That helped raise me. Now, that grandfather was my stepfather for before he passed away at 90, for about 40, 50 years, I think, somewhere around there. Over 50 years as my stepfather. My father, I've known up until he passed away in 1982, so 40 years ago or so. Yes, there is an overlap between my father, my natural father, of course, and my stepdad. So they knew each other, of course. My mom divorced the dad, so that kind of created an interesting perspective on seeing how fatherhood worked. They, in fact, were two different type of personalities, so I got to see that as well. But it really, I think it stems from where we come from, and I think if you're looking at fatherhood, I knew my dad. Interesting. So my stepdad, I might call them both dad, I suppose. But my dad, I knew for 18 years before he passed away. Right? He died right after I turned 18, unexpectedly. So, but he was I always explain to people he was kind of old school in his parenting, and by old school, he was older. He was older than my mother. He was born in 1924, so we call it pre-war. I think there was a distinction between pre-war, being raised and getting in adulthood pre-war versus post-war, for example, where your other grandfather and your grandmother Oma, they're more like post-war in how they grew up. So that made a distinction. But that being said, and I don't mean in a bad way or pejorative, but it was a matter of he was probably pre-war and a little bit more old school. He was raised very structured, with old school standards of hierarchy, absolute hierarchy.
So
How you
father is on top, then sons,
then that's
then
correct.
wife, then daughters, something like that.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that, but something like that. And it was a matter of old school. It was a matter of, very well trained insofar as the upper echelon and how you did things. At that point, this is back in the Indonesia days, it was the upper class, right, that they had. So there was think about it. If you think about, old school British, whatever, the same thing in the Dutch, community and customs it was, there was the father and you respected him. You didn't question that kind of thing. And that's where my father came from. And interestingly enough, I think he was more progressive than I'd give him credit for sometimes. But it was something that he had very strict understanding of who we should be, who we were in society, that we were talented and we've had, you create your opportunity, but then use it. So really, when I talked to his brother after my father passed away, his older brother, who he's not close with, became very close to me. But he explained the family kind of concept of noblesse obligée, which is French for there's an obligation that comes with kind of a noble upbringing, right? So it becomes obligation. So as much as being noble and being in some form of a nobleman, you get things, but you also have an obligation. We were the intellectual warriors, right? So we like to consider ourselves, meaning the Snitchvils, very well read and intellectuals. On the other hand, we were prepared to fight for honor if we had to, and we did. And boy, do we have stories about that. If you ever, I think you guys have seen it. I am not a physical person to take on, my differences, but I sure as hell can use my mouth and have a sharp tongue, and will pretty much cut you anyways if I can in an argument. So that's where it comes from. So it was very old school that way. So with my father, it wasn't like I could play with him and make fun of him too much, etc. But he also understood his obligation was to raise his children, who he loved dearly. Make no mistake. I mean, he was, it wasn't big signs of affection. For the amount of affection he'd give you, it was probably more than he got from his father. It was a few hugs here and there.
Did you know your grandfather at all, or is that?
I never knew my grandfather. My grandfather died in one of the wars.
Okay.
I get mixed with whether it was World War II or the Indonesian Revolution thereafter, but somewhere, sniper shot. That's what did it. And he was not even in the war. He was not a soldier. But anyway, it happened. That's wartime, I guess. So I never get to meet him or my grandmother on that side. So I don't know. But he was great. But he would he's very intellectual, give you the structured explanation of things and who we should be and why we should be. And great sense of humor, actually, well respected by people. But the point as a father, here's what I will show you to do. And I do things. I work on cars with him, and I knew he was an electromechanical engineer that worked in aerospace. So when he worked on a car, he knew what he was doing, and he'd get frustrated if I couldn't follow. It's like I wasn't technical that way. So there sometimes was a riff between me and my father, but because I felt that I couldn't live up to what he was asking. That was the relationship. All good and not, right? And again, I don't mean it doesn't sound as bad as it was. It was a good relationship, but I knew that there was a thing that I could not. I felt less sometimes, and it was a challenge. And it was tough growing up that way in other ways. Separately, I had my stepfather, and his attitude was much different. He was not, I don't want to say he wasn't intellectual, but that wasn't his thing. He was a doer. He just took care of things. He took care of people. And I saw it with my half brother. He was the kind that would wrestle on the floor with his kids. Not my dad. We would actually, we'd go shooting and sometimes have blanks and shoot at each other. But that's how we did it. But wrestling on the floor, that was
70s were a wild time.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. Shooting blanks at each other, I don't think is something that'll happen too often these days.
No, not these days. And so
maybe not.
Stay in school, don't do drugs, and don't shoot each other.
Exactly.
But the point is that it was a different kind of relationship I had with my father.
Sure.
And so to see that, so when it came to see my stepfather raise his grandkids, particularly, like you, Ryan, he would
Mhm.
wrestle on the floor with you. That's not what I did. If you recall, most likely, I didn't wrestle on the ground much with you guys. That's not how I was wired. And what I'm getting at is that which I became and who I became really came more from, I think, my father in many ways than it came from my stepfather,
Mhm.
Pop as I would call him, or Opa as you would know him, Opa you knew.
Yep.
So so it's interesting, and it's still he would, so Opa, so my stepdad, he would instill certain things in me as well, because you would see as an example, good example there for him was how to be a husband. He was an extraordinarily good husband and father to his wife and kids respectively, and so and sometimes you didn't see it that way because he'd be frustrated, he couldn't articulate well why he was mad at me, and that got me mad and that kind of thing. But net you saw that, and what a man he truly was. So I learned from his example. That way I learned intellectually from my father, so I have a mix. But those are the kind of things that it came from, which comes down to you, right? And and how did I do that? And I did make adjustments insofar as how I raised you guys. For example,
Sure. And
because of my father and in spite of my father.
and to kind of distill that further, right? So you kind of have an idea of where you landed, and we haven't really gotten into these are my values, these are how I define my values, and these are what I think are important. But I think, with me growing up and my siblings as well, I think that sort of pride in the family name was definitely something that cut through, um, almost to a fault. But that's probably another
Which
topic for
part
another
now? Say
time.
it again.
The pride in our name, right? The pride in
Ah,
our the confidence in the Snipeshville name, and um, something to be, that you think, and we joke about it all the time, oh, but we're better than them, but there's an inkling of truth there, in an unfortunate sense,
y- y-
that does have a fault to it, but that's, once again, I think that gets dissected at another time.
No,
That
no.
definitely cut
I
through.
think we'll dissect it now because I think you hit exactly on the nerve. You were exactly right. The it's nothing personal. We're just better than you.
Sure.
Not entirely, not truly, but having your shit together was important, and that's and certainly it's how you project. And the reason why you did that to project is because there's so many things that can unravel you from the externals that you always have to show a hard side, right? You couldn't be too open sometimes because that was the vulnerability, etc. And that's the creation. I think one of the reasons why you create the strong shell and says we have our crap together and we know what we're doing, and people and be prepared for that. But you're exactly right. And the interesting part there, and I'll let you go. Let me just say this, and
Sure.
you can say that
Yeah. You're good.
is that's exactly how things are different, and yet you picked up on that is something that tells me that I didn't do as a good job. I didn't divert as much as I thought I did from my father.
I think there's going to always be some sort of through line, regardless. With the close interactions, and I'm sure it's going to be there with my son, as well, whether or not I like it or not. One thing I pulled away from, that, so a lot of it comes from familial pride, right? This is our name, this is who we are, this is what we do, and in a way, personally, I didn't like being put in that box. I didn't like being put in that, okay, but what if I want to do something else? Which is neither here nor there, at the moment, because I did what I wanted regardless. But what I did manage to pull away from it, and something that has benefited me greatly, I think, is conviction, right? And it's might as well get into to values now. Is whenever I do something, I try to be as convicted as possible that it's the right thing for me to do at that present moment. Um, and that's something I do want to pass on through to my son. Is people that I've interacted with have become, if anything, more increasingly wishy-washy, flaky. They want to do something, but they don't. And I find it very positive in my life that when I've set my mind to something, that I have, for me specifically, when I know that there's something that I want to do for myself, that I go out and I go do it. That does come with a little bit of a baggage from the aforementioned sort of where it came from, in the sense that there is arrogance that follows. There is an arrogance of, okay, I'm going to do the job because I think I can do the job the best, when might not necessarily be the truth. There's an arrogance that follows that I think my wife is always quick to call me out for when we'll talk about a conversation that I, to be fair, have no expertise in, but talk like I have expertise in. And she tells me, no, you just said that out of your butt. There's no way that you know that's right or wrong. So there are situations in the sense that I think the conviction might go a little too far, but at the end of the day, I do feel very, very proud, I guess, of the name and the ability to feel confident in the decisions that I make.
So yeah, and that's interesting because that is there is a fine line there. It's a proud name, proud family. If you know the last name, it's not really easy, and I still don't believe today I can change it without getting confirmation from my cousins around the world that
Right.
it's okay to change. And even though I shouldn't have to do that, but that's just an allegiance to the family. There is a strong allegiance to the history of the family. You are correct. And the interesting part is, my father often would tell me, and his older brother, who became, like my dad to me after his passing, about the family, strength and who we are, and etc. And so it came very strong. By the way, it's still the conviction is still there
Right.
in other parts of the family, good, bad, or indifferent. It's still there. But the interesting part was there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of insecurities that come with that because there's expectation. This goes back
Right.
to the noblesse oblige kind of concept. It's like, look, you are raised with opportunity. Now you have to perform with like you have opportunity. So make sure you succeed here, by the way, and also that you support these causes or whatever it is, and respect that other people don't necessarily have that. That makes sense. And that gets to a point of there was a sense of pride. You use the word arrogance, which is not inaccurate. So that goes with it. So that theme goes there, and the difference is I have never in my recollection in the 30 some years in my marriage, I have never said anything that specifically says this is what you must be or must do because we are the family and blah blah blah.
Right.
And yet it still came through because now
Right.
you're telling me it's interesting. You're like, I thought I hid that from you because it creates such anxiety, such insecurities. I know because I lived through it. I have cousins who've lived through it.
Sure.
And so as a result, I did what I could not to give you, not to set expectations, but be who you are. There were certain standards. Make no
Right.
mistake. So the distinction, maybe my standards still came out,
I
but
think
it's
that's where it was.
what's that?
So, for example, it's you show up for these events, right? So it's any sort of family gathering, any sort of expectation to be with a group of people who are deemed important. It is expected of you to go there, be present, and look present. So whether that be
Absolutely.
in your attire,
Absolutely.
whether that be in your demeanor, it's always you are there to be there. Um, and I think even though you didn't, explicitly state this is who we do because it's our family, the lesson was still there because that's who you were.
Yeah, I think so. Now, keep in mind, um, there's a blur there. I think, insofar as where it comes from, and it's actually we talked about. I think you asked me what are the three truths,
Sure.
the three things can the top three. What did you call them?
Gun to your head. What do you believe yourself to be?
Yeah,
Who do
to
you
be,
believe
or in
yourself
my
to
case,
be?
that I want. Yeah, kind of the things that I want my kids to learn and be.
Right.
And in my top three is learning, and has always been the case, and you've heard this. You need to learn to get along with other people. A lot of things happen. By the way, you do that quite well. A lot of things that happen in life is going to be conflict, issues of perceived conflicts, and a lot of it is because you're simply misunderstood or you misunderstood somebody else, and you meaning collectively anyone puts so much importance on that to the point that family won't speak to each other for 30 years, that
Right.
you'll hate your neighbor for God knows how long. You don't like the lady at Target who checked you out, whatever it is, right? So all these things come into play, and the reality was processing it from a perspective, from an individual, personal perspective, from the other person. They had a bad day. It's not about you, whatever it is, right? It was always a matter of learn how to get along with everybody, and the reason is you are going to have instances where you're going to have a boss, for example, that you don't like, right? Don't let that dictate how you necessarily behave or change behavior. Yes, you make adjustments to get along, and that's my point. You make adjustments to be able to cope with it, deal with it, and not change who you are because you're strong enough of who you are, but you still are able to cope with it. Get along with people is almost on the pretty much number two, actually number one on my list. I've always said that. Learned how to get along with other people, and that's why. So when it comes to family events, and yes, there are some traditions, if you will, that we have in our family, more on my side than mom's side to some degree, and even mom is very family oriented. I don't want to dismiss that. Mom does that as well, but there's an expectation of, if we're having a birthday for an aunt, and it's not too far away, and you have the time, can you please show up and make an appearance, eat, and leave? Right? That's kind of the theory, and the reason it goes back to, it's how we treat people. It's getting along with people. You don't get to pick and choose who you always want to be with, because at the end of the day, those might have been more important people than you think. And when I say important, not like they could have gotten you a job or a career or given you money. That's irrelevant. It's a matter of how important they are to the life. Or in this case, it's I understand maybe not the aunt, but your grandmother's there, so Oma's there and sees that you were there, and that helps her. And then so the whole point is, we have to learn to make obligations and do things with people that we otherwise, other people could just dismiss. I don't like those people. I don't want to deal with it. The point is, life is much, much, much easier in my experience if you know how to get along. I didn't say like everybody, love everybody, but how to get along, make adjustments. There are going to be people, and trust me, I've had that too, that you just can't get by, and there's issues, and I throw fits. Usually it's when I'm driving and they cut me off, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
You get the same way. Actually, you're probably less. You're certainly some of your siblings, your mother. Oh my God. So it's our way of life. But that's what I'm getting. So that goes back to, yes, there was expectation, because it had to do with getting along with people. People, meaning family, the people. Do not discount exactly how important people are. In fact, if I can move on real quick, my other second, one of my three list, family is important. Family is extremely important. And so I've learned that. Now, if you know my history, I lost my father when I was 18. I lost my sister when I was 20, I think, because she was 22, right? So I've learned what loss is. And so to me, to just, dismiss, well, it's just a sibling. It's like, remember with siblings, and this is what I'm a strong believer in. Yeah, I didn't say you have to like each other all the time like best friends, but you have to have enough there that if they knock at the door at 3 a.m, you let them in without question, right? Whether you like them, didn't talk to them in 10 years, doesn't matter. And the reason is, few reasons. One, it's an extension of me and mom, right? That's what you're doing. You're on behalf of your parents who raised you. Can you please do that? Because it's also one of our children, flat out. So I think that's really important. Additionally, and we try to raise you guys enough connected this way, that at the end of the day, if mom and I are gone, the only people left in line to give a crap about you is going to be your siblings. It's not going to be your spouse's families, your best friend, your family, your friends at work. Or, now, I'm not saying your spouse is bad. I'm saying, but we know sometimes we have the legal option to say we no longer want to be together, we divorce, but you can't divorce your family. So I know your wife. I know my son-in-law and my 2 daughters-in-law. I have no reason to believe that they shouldn't be the number one person and go to, but I can only go based on, I have to do your lifetime, right? And in your lifetime, which I'm not going to be around forever, please rely on your siblings, let them know, and vice versa. And I know it could be a burden, but the reality is that's the strength. So getting along with people is extremely important. Right. And family is extremely important. Again, don't do stupid things. Don't go bend over backwards. Don't take crap from people, your sibling, if you don't want to. Say your piece, that's okay. But you need to understand, you need to get along. And even that I know is imperfect in your own space.
And that's, what's interesting is, and this might be a personal thing, this may have resonated differently with my siblings and how they believe or view family, but that actually has never resonated with me very hard. For better or for worse, I feel it's okay to disconnect from family. I know that's not necessarily what you'd maybe want to hear from what your son has taken away from life, but I really feel that if there is a toxic relationship within the family, I think, let's back up a second. I think family is earned, if not at least has the right to a little bit more leeway than friend or some coworker, whatever, right? They get a little bit more leeway in terms of unacceptable behavior, for lack of a better way of putting
Absolutely
it.
Correct. Absolutely.
However, if a sibling, parent, in-law, whatever it might be, is inherently toxic, and that toxicity degrades you or maybe your loved one, I think it's okay to make that decision and say, no, I don't want you part of my life. I don't want you contacting me, and I don't want you to think of me as a resource. And that is in the sense that, yes, family is going to be pretty thick, but they can also really take advantage of you. And I don't think that's necessarily fair to the individual.
I don't disagree with any of that. I think there's limits to everything.
Sure.
Um, but I suppose, I mean, and I've said this before, and you've witnessed this before, that who am I almost the meanest and toughest to in life?
I don't know, Evan.
No, not my kids.
Oh, me?
You're one of my kids. So
Oh,
no.
that's right.
So okay, so I won't make it a secret. I'm worse to my mother than anybody else.
Oh, yeah, you're awful to her.
No, you thank
God,
you. Right?
terrible. Oh, my God. I love my mother, and you are terrible to yours.
Uh-huh. Anyway, baloney. But my point being that what I expect from my kids anyway, and we've tolerated. You are right about toxicity, even with the parent-child. If it comes to a point, okay, let's say usually it's addiction based. I'm not saying we had that
Sure.
problem in our family, but I've seen that
Right.
before. So I recognize that sometimes I say I'm severing the relationship for your own good and for mine as well. I've seen parents do that to children. Okay, I've
Right.
heard of that. So you are correct. Everything has a limit, even a parent to a child. Okay, but I think one of the highest levels for a parent, the toxicity they're going to of a toxic relationship is their own children. And the reason is, in my opinion, is they're good with their coworkers, their spouse, maybe their siblings, certainly their friends. But being human is extremely difficult.
Mm.
The social conventions we put in place about how, like I just told you, you got to get along with people, be nice, etc. That's true, but there's got to be an outlet sometimes. That it's your spouse is sometimes the case, but always not healthy, right? It could be its
Right.
own issue. But your parent will always accept it because, we birthed them, we're going to keep them, and I guess we'll deal with it.
Yeah.
So as a parent, you need to be strong enough to take the ugliness, the worst your child can be. You need to absorb that. That's what I believe. Okay, that there's limits. Don't get me wrong. I don't think
Right.
I don't think it's fair that you beat me up because, well, now you could easily.
Right.
But but there's no beatings involved. But I'm saying that you just accept it more. And so the next rung to that is your siblings. So the highest level of toxicity you would tolerate is your siblings. I didn't say that you had to. They knock on the door at 3 a.m. You haven't seen them in 10 years, and you let them in, and they're allowed to stay forever. It's not what I said. They're allowed to stay 2 or 3 days and say, "Get your shit together. What's your plan, and how can I help it?" Okay, that's what I'm asking. A
Sure,
friend
sure.
can say, "I haven't seen you in 10 years. I'm not letting you in." Okay, that's
Right.
cool, but not a sibling. So you are absolutely correct. There are boundaries. There are limits. As you get older, you'll find out some of the limits you put in are artificial.
Right.
Because you're younger, not as experienced, etc. So sometimes we create issues. I'm not asking for you to be best friends. What I'm asking you is that you will accept kind of where you went with, which is a very good example, a very good point. Is I'm here to absorb as much ugliness as I can tolerate as your sibling, as I'm supposed to, which is
Sure.
usually a higher tolerance than you'll get from your neighbor, your best friend, maybe even
Yep.
your spouse. And so that's what I'm talking about. So that's why I think siblings are important. You
Sure.
put it in a very good. I'm glad I said it this way. I don't think I ever really articulated it that way.
Sure.
But there is limits, but there's limits for different people, and I think
That's
siblings
fair.
are pretty
Yeah,
high.
yeah, I'd agree. I would agree with that. So with that, actually, we need to kind of wrap things up a little bit. We're kind of tight on time as it is, and we have maybe a third of the way through probably what we wanted to actually talk about. So I'm.
Hey, why don't we
sure
do?
we
Hey,
can-
how about that? Why don't we do this again?
Yeah, I think we pick this. I think we pick up this topic again.
Yeah.
We kind of talked about my importance with, well, the conviction through line of the family that you have, whether or not you wanted to exemplify it or not, came through, right? And I think is going to have some burden, for lack of a better way of putting it, on our family so long as our last name exists. And I think that's just, it's a unique last name, and our kid is going to have questions about it. I think that's just always going to be the case. And sort of see how that kind of plays out in the next 100, 200 years. Who knows, right?
That's how long the line goes. But
Right, exactly. Like, I can only be responsible for so much.
so am I. Look at
Yeah, right.
By the way, it's what I told people when they met you. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't be responsible for so much.
And I think, I think we had a good tangent there with the family conversation, and
I think it's important. I think it's
being important with people.
But don't mistake this. I understand it's a burden, but it isn't one that you should avoid. because at the end of the day, getting along with people, so on and so forth, these things, the truth is the other one that I have, right?
Yep.
Being who you are, it's extremely important. And so don't shy away from it simply because it's a family burden. Sometimes, and in many cases, there's reason for it, and it makes for a better place for you, the family, your children, your spouse, the world in itself. There's a reason for it. Just because you've identified it as a burden doesn't make it bad, and doesn't mean you should abandon it. So you just got to pick and choose which ones you're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, with that, I think we'll close it out. Thanks, Dad.
All right, and we'll pick it up again some other times. Thanks, Ryan. That was fun.